something remarkable happened today at St. Peter's Basilica. Without making a single announcement, Pope Leo reintroduced a liturgical gesture that had quietly disappeared nearly a decade ago, removed during the pontificate of Pope Francis in 2015. There was no statement, no formal explanation, just a simple act during the Mass. But for those familiar with the deep traditions of the Church, it spoke louder than any words. Now, Catholics around the world are asking, was this just a one-time moment, or the beginning of something greater? It's been over 10 years since this gesture was last seen. And today, at the heart of the Vatican, it returned. Pope Leo made a choice, subtle yet unmistakable, that signaled a clear departure from the liturgical style of his predecessor. It wasn't confrontational. It wasn't political. It was deeply symbolic. There were no speeches or documents to explain it. But for many of the faithful, especially those who have been watching closely, no explanation was needed. They understood the message, and they had been waiting for it. To understand the importance of what just happened, we need to go back to 2015. That was the year Pope Francis introduced a significant change to one of the oldest traditions of the papal liturgy. He removed from the Pope the role of placing the pallium, the woolen band symbolizing unity and authority, on newly appointed metropolitan archbishops. Instead, that sacred act was delegated to papal representatives, the nuncios, who would carry out the ceremony within each archbishop's local diocese. The intention, according to Pope Francis, was to emphasize what he called pastoral decentralization. It was meant to strengthen the bond between the archbishop and the local faithful, focusing more on the local church and less on the authority of Rome. But not everyone welcomed this change. While the explanation highlighted pastoral closeness, many viewed it as a symbolic retreat from Rome's spiritual centrality. To them, it seemed like a subtle weakening of the visible unity between local bishops and the successor of Peter. Today, on the great solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, something quietly historic took place inside St. Peter's Basilica. Pope Leo once again placed the pallium with his own hands upon the shoulders of the new metropolitan archbishops, a gesture rich in meaning, deeply rooted in tradition, and long associated with the heart of the papacy. The pallium is far more than a decorative garment. It is a sacred symbol, a sign of spiritual authority, ecclesial unity, and the shared identity of bishops within the universal church. For centuries, this woolen band has been placed on new metropolitans by the Pope himself, and always on this very feast, within the basilica dedicated to the apostles. To receive the pallium directly from the hands of the successor of Peter was never just a ritual. It was a visible expression of communion, a seal of unity between Rome and the bishops who shepherd their flocks across the world. It connected the center of the church to her farthest peripheries in a gesture that was both humble and powerful. Woven from white wool, marked by 6 black crosses, and worn gently around the shoulders like a light yoke, the pallium carries deep symbolism. It represents the calling of the shepherd to guide, to support, and when necessary, to lay down his life for the good of the flock. It's no accident that the pallium is made from the wool of 2 lambs that are specially blessed each year on the feast of Saint Agnes. After the blessing, their wool is kept safe until the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, when it is woven into the pallia and then symbolically presented to the Pope. Every detail in this ancient rite speaks of deep roots, of sacrifice, and of unity in the Church. But in 2015, that visible thread of connection was quietly cut, not by changing doctrine, but by altering the sign itself. From that year forward, metropolitans no longer traveled to Rome to receive the pallium from the hands of the Pope. Instead, they were given the sacred vestment by a papal representative, in ceremonies held within their own dioceses. The reform, introduced under Pope Francis, was framed in terms of synodality and inculturation, principles aimed at giving more space to local expressions of faith. Yet for many Catholics, including numerous priests and bishops, something vital had been lost in the process. Yes, the bishop still received the pallium, but he no longer received it from the Pope. The liturgy remained, but it no longer unfolded beneath the dome of St. Peter's. The gesture survived, but its source felt distant, even diminished. By restoring the original tradition today, Pope Leo has done more than reintroduce a ceremonial act. He has reconnected a thread that once visibly tied each metropolitan to the heart of the Church. He has brought to light a theology, a way of seeing, that affirms the Roman pontiff not merely as a symbolic figure, not merely as the first among equals, but as a father who sends, who entrusts, who commissions. This isn't the first time Pope Leo has extended a hand toward tradition. From the earliest days of his pontificate, there have been subtle but meaningful signs, small gestures that have not gone unnoticed by the faithful. The more reserved use of papal vestments, the measured tone in public addresses, and private meetings with communities devoted to the ancient liturgy have all pointed to a quiet openness. And now, his decision to restore the imposition of the pallium within the Roman liturgy seems to fit within this same pattern. It is not a declaration of rupture, but a gesture of reconciliation. A mending of threads rather than the drawing of new lines. In this approach, Pope Leo appears to be practicing what could be called a silent restoration, one that doesn't loudly announce itself, but gently begins to repair what has been frayed. Still, not everything is easy to interpret. Alongside these hopeful signals, there are also signs of contradiction, details that have stirred unease among the more attentive and observant members of the Church. In recent months, several episcopal appointments have raised eyebrows. Some bishops known for their alignment with more progressive theological and pastoral agendas have been elevated to high-ranking positions. These choices, though perhaps strategic, have not yet been matched by similar appointments of bishops with a more traditional or conservative orientation. And so, the question lingers: what direction is this papacy truly taking? At the heart of the Vatican, a quiet tension remains. Even some statements made by prelates closely associated with Pope Leo, though never outright dismissive, have often been vague enough to keep uncertainty alive. These mixed signals have left many with the impression that differing, even conflicting, visions for the Church still coexist within the Curia. In this atmosphere of ambiguity, tradition appears to be tolerated, but not yet fully embraced. The gestures of Pope Leo seem genuine, even heartfelt, but at times they feel isolated. A clear direction has not yet been drawn. There is no firm indication that he intends to undo the restrictions placed under Pope Francis, particularly those issued in traditionist custods. For many believers, this uncertainty is not just political, it is personal. In recent years, countless Catholics who found spiritual nourishment in the traditional forms of the faith have felt pushed aside. Not formally condemned, but subtly marginalized. They've been called rigid, treated as if they were clinging to the past, watched with suspicion, not because of rebellion, but because of love for what the Church has preserved for generations. They are not fringe radicals. They are families, young couples, seminarians, priests, and religious. They have not caused division or stirred rebellion. They have not broken communion. But they have carried a quiet suffering. And they have prayed. For many, hope had faded. After the suppression of the Latin Mass in numerous dioceses, after the imposition of restrictions and the silent penalties some endured, it seemed that Rome had turned its back on them. Some remained patient, faithful in the shadows. Others withdrew, quietly heartbroken. Still others, with sorrow in their hearts, looked away, unsure if they would ever be welcomed again. And yet today, something changed. With a single, ancient gesture, Pope Leo spoke to them without saying a word. He offered no declarations, no sweeping statements, no condemnations or reforms. But his action, rooted in tradition, carried out with simplicity, communicated something deeper than any speech. In the Church, actions like this carry a meaning words cannot hold. And for those who have long waited in silence, it may be the first sign that they have not been forgotten. He didn't make a proclamation. He didn't announce a revolution. But he did something quietly powerful. He reclaimed a right. In doing so, Pope Leo restored something essential, not just to the liturgy, but to Rome itself. He reminded the faithful that not all has been lost. It was a sign. Not a sweeping reform, not a promise of future change, but a sign nonetheless, one that speaks to those who have carried in their hearts, often in silence, the treasures the Church has passed down through the centuries. It was a gesture that says, "You are not forgotten." A sign like this does not erase the past. It doesn't solve every contradiction, but it can rekindle hope. It can remind us that the center of the church still has the capacity to reach out to its peripheries, not to erase them, not to correct them, but to embrace them. We are not called to judge hearts, but we are called to notice the signs. And today, on the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, a sign appeared, one rooted in reverence, one drawn from tradition. A gesture returned. A form was revived. A silence was broken. Perhaps it is only a moment. Perhaps it will stand alone. But even a single moment, even a quiet sign, can be enough to remind us of a deeper truth. That the church is not ultimately governed by human strategy, but sustained by divine providence. We, the faithful, are not asked to predict the future. We are asked to be faithful in the present, to remain steady in prayer, to stand firm in hope, to endure with patience, trusting not in power, but in grace. Not everything is clear. Not everything is resolved. But something is moving. And for those who watch with open eyes and ready hearts, even a small gesture can be enough, because when received with love, a sign, no matter how subtle, can become a spark. Tradition is not about longing for the past. It is not mere nostalgia. It is living memory, a sacred thread that connects us to those who came before, and to the truth that endures beyond time. And every time that memory is brought back into the light, even for just a moment, it becomes something worth witnessing. Because when someone dares to return a forgotten gesture to the church, however briefly, it reminds us that what is holy never truly disappears. It waits, patiently, until someone opens the door again. Tradition is not nostalgia. It is not the longing for old rituals or the romance of lost grandeur. Tradition is memory that lives. It is the living breath of the church, carried from generation to generation, not because it is old, but because it is true. It binds us, not to the past, but to the eternal. When a tradition is broken, something is lost, not only in form, but in soul. And when, even for a moment, that tradition is brought back to life, the heart of the church stirs. For those who have waited in silence, who have carried the beauty of these ancient signs in their hearts, that one moment is everything. It is a reminder that what is holy is never truly gone. It only waits to be remembered. Today, in the quiet return of a forgotten gesture, Pope Leo did not simply perform a rite. He reopened a door that for many had seemed permanently closed. He didn't speak. He didn't issue a decree. And yet, he said so much. For those who have endured the slow marginalization of tradition, who have watched the sacred disappear behind layers of pastoral pragmatism, this moment was not about politics. It was not about power struggles or ideological victories. It was about being seen, being acknowledged, being quietly welcomed back into a church that had seemed, for a time, to no longer know what to do with them. These are the faithful who never left the church, but often felt left behind by it. Not because they resisted unity, but because they clung to what had always unified the saints, the reverence, the silence, the sacred gestures that spoke to the mystery of God. These Catholics, young and old, never asked for privilege. They asked only for permission to love what the church had loved. And for years, many of them felt invisible. Some continued on in hope. Others withdrew quietly, choosing not to protest, but to suffer in silence. A few, overwhelmed by sorrow, drifted away, not in anger, but in heartbreak, because they believed that if they loved the church deeply enough, she would one day remember them. And now, perhaps, she has begun to. But this is not the end of a story. It may only be the first page. The gesture of Pope Leo is not a reversal of policy. It is not a bold declaration of reform. It is a sign. And signs, by their nature, invite us to watch closely, to listen carefully, to wait, not passively, but prayerfully, because the renewal of the church will not come through noise. It will not come through division or debate. It will come through fidelity, through the quiet courage of those who continue to kneel, continue to pray, continue to believe, even when they are misunderstood. The question now is not what Pope Leo will do next. The question is what we, the faithful, will do. Will we demand change from above? Or will we live the change from within? The church does not belong to factions. She does not survive through trends. She endures because of saints. saints who were not always popular, saints who often walked in darkness, saints who loved the church even when she seemed silent, saints who held on to tradition not as a weapon, but as a light. This is the calling now, not to fight, but to be faithful, not to complain, but to remain, not to argue, but to adore. And in doing so, we become part of the restoration, not by force, but by fidelity, not by resistance, but by reverence. What the church needs now is not a revolution of structure, but a revival of the sacred. A revival that begins in the heart, that moves in silence, and that finds its way into the liturgy, the family, the seminary, and the soul. Because sacredness cannot be legislated. It must be lived. It must be chosen. It must be loved. That is what makes today's moment so powerful. Not its scale, but its sincerity. Not its publicity, but its purity. One gesture, one act, one sign enough to stir hope where hope had been fading. There are those who will dismiss it as unimportant, others who will insist it changes nothing. But history has never been changed only by proclamations. It has also been changed by those who keep the flame alive when the world believes it is extinguished. So let us not underestimate the power of one sign, welcomed with a watchful heart. Let us remember that the Church has never been in the hands of politicians or strategists. She has always been in the hands of Providence. And God writes His plans not just through councils and encyclicals, but through shepherds who listen and through the faithful who remain. This is not a call to triumph. It is a call to perseverance. To every family that continues to pass on the faith in the face of indifference. To every priest who reverently celebrates the liturgy even when no one notices. To every young person seeking beauty in a world that trades reverence for relevance. To every soul who clings to the rosary, who kneels before the Eucharist, who believes that truth is not old, but eternal. This moment was for you, not as a reward, not as a promise, but as a reminder, you are not alone, you are not forgotten, and perhaps, just perhaps, you are always part of what God was quietly preparing. So do not give up. Do not retreat. Do not grow weary. Keep loving what the Church has always loved. Keep guarding what the saints once died to defend. Keep praying not for a perfect church, but for a holy one. Because in the end, the Church is not saved by plans. She is saved by grace. And grace moves through those who remain faithful, even in the dark. Even a single gesture can be enough, if it finds a heart ready to receive it.